What's up, everyone? Today we're going to do something a little new and different that I haven't done before. I've actually been meaning to do this for a couple years because it's been in my craw for a while. So we are watching right now a documentary by Neil deGrasse Tyson, who you just saw, The Black Science Man. Okay, this is an American documentary series, and it's actually just copy and pasted from Carl Sagan's old documentary series Cosmos. It's named Cosmos too. So why am I doing this? So here's the issue. This documentary series, more than any others, encapsulates the Whig history view of science that is common among kind of Reddit atheist people and, I don't know, people who love Soyentist and stuff like that. And this is the first episode we're watching, and we're going to get to a part that I want to talk about. It's actually right about here. I think I'm going to stop it here. So this documentary, I will just say, might be very impressive if you're first exposed to some of this information, but a lot of it is so deceptive. I don't know if it's because I doubt it's because these people are like liars, but there are a lot of it that is just like, it's just wrong. Like, I don't know what to say about it. And this is specifically in, I guess, their historical narratives and things like that. Now, here is the editorial stance. We'll watch this in just one second. Here's the editorial stance of this documentary series. The view is basically, science is great. We have a Whig history of science. It's constantly improving. It's constantly getting better. Everyone in the past is dumb, deluded, religious. There's particularly, a continuing trend here is, science versus religion. This kind of modern mythology, which, there's this, I don't know, we can talk more about that later, but the very notion that religion, quote unquote, and science are like fighting each other, right? This is something that if you go to a Redditor, this is foundational to their worldview. And it comes from this, and it comes from Carl Sagan's Cosmos. This is where this idea, or not originally comes from, but we'll talk about that later. Either way, I'm just going to jump into it, but what this segment is going to be on. Okay, this is a segment to tell you on a guy named Giordano Bruno. Okay, I'm going to give you spoilers about this. They're going to tell you their version of the story, which is highly distorted. Basically, every line is a lie. Or not necessarily a lie. Maybe they just, I don't know, they're repeating memes. Okay, they don't know any better. They didn't do their research. But Giordano Bruno was a figure in the late 1500s, early 1600s. He was kind of like a philosopher, mystic kind of guy. And he was eventually executed in Rome for heresy. Okay? Now, the narrative of Cosmos that they are going to try, we're going to go through here, but what they want to establish is that Giordano Bruno was actually a scientist. He wasn't, but they want to promote the idea that he is a Soyentist who had these edgy, views that went against religious authorities and all this kind of stuff. And then they shut him up, man. They burned him at the stake because he wasn't all this kind of stuff. Like that trope, that idea. And they're going to give you the case, and I'm going to give you the actual case, or this isn't even to say I'm an expert of this field, but this is just something, I've studied Hermetic writings, of which, Bruno was a proponent of this period, and I'm familiar with the time, enough to tell you that it is nonsense. So either way, let's just watch it, and we'll get into it.
Billion-year history of the universe for their light to have reached us.
All right. Here we go.
Many of us suspect that all of this, all the worlds, stars, galaxies, and clusters in our observable universe, is but one tiny bubble in an infinite ocean of other universes.
Whoa.
A multiverse.
I gotta speed this up a little bit.
Universe upon universe. Worlds without end. Feeling a little small? Well, in the context of the cosmos, we are small. We may just be little guys living on a speck of dust, afloat in staggering immensity. But we don't think small. This cosmic perspective...
I like the whole attempt to make this sound deep.
4 centuries ago, our tiny world was oblivious to the rest of the cosmos. There were no telescopes. The universe was only what you could see with the naked eye. Back in 1599, Everyone knew the sun, planets, and stars were just lights in the sky, revolved around the Earth, and that we were the center of a little universe. A universe made for us. There was only one man on the whole planet who envisioned an infinitely grander cosmos.
I will go ahead and say that that is not true. The idea that Giordano Bruno is like the only person who has ideas like this is nonsensical, but I mean, we'll get into this.
How was he spending New Year's Eve of the year 1600?
It's going to pick up...
Why? In prison.
Yeah, during his trial. It's priming your brain with religious authorities here.
We realize we're not the center of the universe. That we belong to something much greater than ourselves. It's part of growing up. And as it happens to each of us, so it began to happen to our civilization in the 16th century. Imagine a world before telescopes, when the universe was only what you could see with the naked eye. It was obvious that Earth was motionless, and that everything in the heavens, the sun, the moon, the stars, the planets, revolved around us.
So I will say it's not obvious that the Earth is motionless. It was an idea that was legitimately considered by, you know, all authorities at the time. You can read Ptolemy's Almagest, which I have over there. Ptolemy does consider the idea whether the Earth is stationary or the stars, you know, the Earth is moving, like rotating, while the stars are stationary. It was just not thought of as the most economical explanation, given what people knew. Their ideas were the star. I mean, Ptolemy argues that, well, the stars are probably really small, and it makes more sense for the Earth to be stationary and the stars to move around.
And then, a Polish astronomer and priest named Copernicus made a radical proposal. The Earth was not the center. It was just one of the planets, and like them, it revolved around the sun. Many, like the Protestant reformer Martin Luther, took this idea as a scandalous affront to Scripture. They were horrified. But for one man... So,
now they're already trying to counterpose the idea that, oh, there's Soyentist on one side and there's religion on the other. Oh, Martin Luther, he's a religious authority. But the thing you need to remember is that heliocentrism, again, we look back at it and say, oh, heliocentrism is obvious, like there's so many reasons to believe it. I talked about this partially in my podcast episode talking about Feyerabend and stuff like that, because he goes into this. But really, when it first came out, the heliocentric theory, there were many, many reasons not to believe it, many very sensible reasons, and people had built up an entire theoretical architecture around geocentrism that made sense. They didn't understand, you know, the relativity of motion or things like that. Like, obviously, we didn't have the concept of gravity or any of that. So, it's really just a radical theory that, mind you, plenty of scientists absolutely rejected and thought of as being ludicrous. So I'll go ahead and tell you, just as an example, the first one that comes to my head, right? So Neil deGrasse Tyson, who of course is looking at us very smugly, will probably go later into this series into figures like Francis Bacon and things like that, who were supposed to, oh, they're experimentalists, oh, they rejected Platonism and all these other things, oh, wow, they're just like us. Well, Francis Bacon is a good example of a guy who routinely mocked heliocentrism. He didn't think it had any scientific credence. At most people thought it was kind of, oh, like you can get mathematical results from it, but it's still probably absurd. I mean, Francis Bacon, when he actually writes his Novus Organum, which I also have a copy of, I guess I have lots of copies of books, but when he writes it, you know, the Novus Organum, he actually whenever he's like lampooning people who do bad science, the first example he always uses is heliocentrists. Like, they were not, it was not like it was obvious that these, again, before gravity, before all these things, there wasn't necessarily a good reason for a scientific person to be a heliocentrist, right? So the whole thing of him counterposing religious authorities against, you know, secular, you know, scientific authorities is kind of, it's poisoning the well again. And you also have to remember that the main reason that church authorities, quote unquote, believe that the Earth is the center of the universe is not because the Bible like says that explicitly in any way, but it's the Aristotelian universe, right? They're really not, like, in this whole segment that we go through, when we're talking about, you know, oh, the church says this, the church didn't believe in that, what you should really be thinking is they're Aristotelians, right? They're not giving, like, the view of the Bible. They're giving the view of Aristotle. That is the way that people looked at the universe, right? During this period. So, anyway, or Ptolemy, right? So Ptolemy kind of perfected Aristotle's view or whatever.
Didn't go far enough.
In some ways, right?
His name was Giordano Bruno, and he was a natural-born rebel. He longed.
It is true that he's a natural-born rebel.
even as a young Dominican monk in Naples.
Actually, I'll go ahead and say this on the rebel point. So one thing that they're going to omit this entire time is that Bruno, as a person, he was very combative and arrogant, okay? So he got into a lot, like there are a lot of people, I'll go ahead and say, who had views very similar to Bruno, and they were just less... this is actually exactly the same with Galileo, for those who are familiar with this, but which I also talked about in that podcast episode. But Bruno was very confrontational. He was very, he just kind of ignored a lot of stuff. And fundamentally, he wasn't even a scientist. Like, he was like this kind of philosopher mystic who was talking to scientists who actually believed in geocentrism. And either way, I'm getting too much into it. We'll watch it.
This was a time when there was no freedom of thought in Italy.
That's not true.
To know everything about God's creation.
I don't know why they would say there's no. Okay, actually, we gotta firm back. So, firstly, the idea that there's no freedom of thought in Italy. What the hell does that even mean? I don't know. Like, this is something you could only say if someone is just not familiar with all of historical writings, which I guess a lot of people are, but you had philosophers all over the place. Like, this is actually the renaissance of like neo-Hermeticism and things like this. Bruno was just like a more extreme variant of this kind of guy. He basically went as far as denying the divinity of Christ and things like that actually made him a heretic. But to say that people didn't have freedom of thought, or scientific inquiry wasn't allowed. Mind you, I just said 2 seconds ago, right, that Aristotle was universally accepted as sort of the default cosmic interpretation. I mean, during the Middle Ages, originally when Aristotle came into, Europe in, maybe around 1000, 1100 or something like that, people were very skeptical of it. But there was never like a serious period of skepticism. They evaluated Aristotelianism. There were some things they said are incompatible with Christianity, but never were his books even banned. Okay? So what it says here, this is just false, what they're saying right here. He dared to read the books banned by the church.
And that was his undoing.
Okay, so a couple things about, well, actually, we'll watch this.
Roman, a man dead for more than 1,500 years, whispered to him of a universe far greater.
Okay, so Lucretius was never banned by the church. In fact, when the church, during the Protestant Reformation, okay, once the Protestant Reformation started, the Catholic Church did start banning books. But they were primarily Protestant and atheist books that were written at the time period. You can actually go, I think on another, so at this link here, you can actually look for yourself, like if you don't believe me. Here is the index of banned books that the Catholic Church put out, and it's not loading. Apparently my internet knows that I need it right now. Either way, I'll let that load. So the Catholic Church did not ban like atheist philosophers from 2,000 years ago. Okay, they looked at classics, they evaluated them. That it was licit to read these things. Obviously, a lot of people would criticize atomism and Lucretius and things like this because they didn't believe in it. But the idea that it's banned or he was like reading secret things is silly. If he was reading banned books, the only ones that were really banned were things like Protestant writings or, I don't know, if you're reading like Hugo Grotius or things like that. Those are the caliber of books that were banned. And mind you, a lot of people have this notion that the Middle Ages was, it's like the Dark Ages, and like people weren't allowed to question religious authorities. Arguably, that's even less true in the Middle Ages, because it wasn't until around, 1550s or so that the Catholic Church even put these books on the index of prohibited books, okay? So, and again, it was like only modern writings, but in the Middle Ages, there was not even something like that. You could read pretty much whatever. Anyway, so here's the index of prohibited books. So let's look for Lucretius. Oh, that pattern is not found. Let's find, I don't know, Democritus, because he was an atomist as well. No, you don't, there's nothing here. If you look at these names, sorry, it's in Latin, obviously. But if you look at the names, they're all like dual name people. They're all like, people who have Christian names or like they're modern people, basically. Most of these you've never heard of. Now there were famous people, and we'll talk about later, who were put on the index of prohibited books, including heliocentrists. But that's almost like sort of Bruno's fault, and we'll get into that later. So either way, this insinuation that he's reading a banned book, like the church banned like ancient, like the church kept all of these writings alive in monasteries. Like I don't know what they're saying. The idea that Lucretius is banned is so silly, and it's so false.
His idea of God. Lucretius asked the reader to imagine standing.
I actually did a video talking about Lucretius. Or no, on my video, What is Natural? I think I mentioned it in passing. I didn't really do it on De Rerum Natura.
It's the wall. That wall must lie beyond what you thought was the edge of the universe. Now if you stand on that wall and shoot another arrow, you're only the same two possible outcomes.
So here's our mind puzzle, or mind experiment to prove that the universe is infinite.
You can stand and shoot yet another arrow. Either way, the universe is unbounded. The cosmos must be infinite. This made perfect sense to Bruno. The God he worshipped was infinite. So how, he reasoned, could creation be anything less?
So I'll go ahead and add a little addendum here, because obviously what Tyson is going to argue is more or less Giordano Bruno, who again, like, notice he's not doing like scientific experiments. He's doing mind games. He's not really a scientist. Again, he's kind of a philosopher, mystic kind of guy. But either way, he's going to argue, oh, look, Bruno has a worldview that's so much like ours. And that's just like that's not true. I mean, there might be in some respects that he doesn't believe that the universe has boundaries. But just to give you historical background, usually when it came to the universe being infinite, I got to sneeze, but it's not coming. Okay, when it came to the idea of the universe being infinite, okay, you had two different worldviews, and this is important to contrast, actually. And also two different visions of God, right? So in the, okay, let's say the Christian interpretation, or not just Christian, let's say theistic. The idea that God created a universe, and that universe is not him. Like he created this other thing called the universe, right? So in that view, God creates the universe at some point in time, right? So the universe is not infinite in terms of time. It hasn't been there forever. In the universe, there are similar mind experiments like this that these people would make these arguments that, well, if the universe is not, if it's not infinite in time, it also cannot be infinite in space. It can't expand from this particular point to reach infinite space if it hasn't been around for infinite time, right? Things like that. So that's more the Christian worldview, and it's not just a Christian worldview. It would be like more classical theism, okay, as opposed to what Bruno supports, which is more like pantheism or maybe panentheism. And the idea here is, now notice atheism is not in the running. There's no one who's an atheist. There are, again, Lucretius is kind of an atheist, like the atomist people, but they're like not as philosophically serious as these two major groups. But the other group is more like a pantheist interpretation, which is what Bruno has. And that is basically God is infinite, in the same way that the theistic God is infinite, but creation itself is in some way God, or is in some way a part of God. And therefore, creation should be infinite, not just in space, but also in time. So one thing that separates Bruno's worldview, and this is pretty drastic, from Neil deGrasse Tyson's worldview, is the fact that Neil deGrasse Tyson is like those theists who more or less believes in the Big Bang, right? Who believes that the universe had some kind of origin. Now, maybe he can say, oh, well, maybe there's some time before that, or, that comes from somewhere else. But, there's this idea that space-time, spreads out from one point in time. That is something, like, if you told that to someone like Bruno, he would probably reject it. His view, and the view of Aristotle, this is one of the really the only reason that Aristotle was a little controversial when he came to the Christian world. They believe that the universe itself is infinite in time as well. Okay, that kind of goes with it. Like, God is infinite. God basically, he kind of is the universe, or the universe as a creation is part of God, and it's infinite in both time and space. So again, like, the contrast of, like, this, it's not exactly what, Tyson is getting at either way. But now, mind you, there's a pretty good book that I read a bit ago back on plasma. Actually, I think I have that one too. I might as well get all these books I'm talking about. I think it's on my couch. Back in this is still sort of an idea that some people have. The Big Bang never happened by Eric Lerner. So the plasma cosmology people, they say exactly what I just said about the origin of the universe. They basically say, oh, well, Neil deGrasse Tyson, like modern scientists now, they're basically creationists because they believe that the universe has been created at a set time. Whereas plasma cosmology people, they'll be basically like, oh, the universe is part of like this massive plasma cycle, and like, it has to be bajillions of more years older than we expect it and stuff like that. So anyway, let's get onto it. Oh my goodness, look at the evil-looking church people!
It was the last steady job.
You can tell they're bad guys because they have, like, brow ridges with shadows. Actually, let's look at that again. I don't know, it's just...
The last...
Like, the faces, look at them. They look just so evil. And I will also talk about... probably in the course of this, I will also talk about Galileo, because... The Galileo incident is kind of similar. And that's actually a case where Galileo, it's debatable whether he was like trying to troll. But for a long time, he actually had the support of the Pope and all these people until he basically, well, I don't know. We'll talk about it when we get to it. I might just talk about it at the end.
He had the vision that sealed his fate. In this dream, he awakened to a world enclosed inside a confining bowl of stars. This was the cosmos of Bruno's time.
I should note that is not the cosmos of Bruno's time, because it's not a flat disk at the bottom. It's, the Earth, which is a sphere, and there are, spheres around it. So, but, that's artistic. I don't think they're trying to lie here,
He experienced a sickening moment of fear, as if the bottom of everything was falling away beneath his feet. But he summoned up his courage.
Spread confident wings to space and soared toward the infinite, leaving far behind me what others strained to see from a distance. Here, there was no up, no down, no edge.
So notice that, Bruno, again, he's not a scientist, he's not doing scientific experiments. His vision is just like some dream. Like, the reason he believes what he believes... I'll pause it for a second. The reason that he believes what he believes is not because he has some, like, deep scientific reasoning for it. Okay, I mean, maybe some mind puzzles, like mind experiments, but fundamentally he thought it was a cool, interesting idea. And that's actually a totally valid, like, I'm not dismissing that. Obviously, there are many respects in which Bruno's view of the universe is closer to what we now consider sensible, right? But again, this narrative of scientific persecution, which they're going to get into, is nonsensical, right?
Bruno became an evangelist, spreading the gospel of infinity throughout Europe. He assumed that other lovers of God would naturally embrace this grander and more glorious view of creation.
What a fool I was.
I will just say, like, the whole use, like, Tyson's use of God, as if, God is just, like, this word that people have good emotions about, and, oh, wow, look, his worldview, it just makes us feel good about, like, God, makes him feel more power. I mean, God is still infinite in both interpretations. It's whether creation is infinite, and really whether creation is God. Again, Bruno is basically a pantheist or a panentheist that more or less thinks that the universe itself is divine. The universe is God, right? And that is not, like, I hate to tell you, that's just not compatible, not just with Christianity, but really any major religion. He's really, I don't think I mentioned it before, but Bruno is a Hermeticist, right? So he's influenced by the supposed writings of Hermes Trismegistus, which I would recommend you to go to lindypress.net and buy the Corpus Hermeticum, but I actually have not put it up there yet. So this was a worldview that was more like the pantheists. They had the idea that the universe, the physical universe, is kind of a subset of God, right? But it's the idea, like, of course, no one else is going to accept it, who's a Christian or even any other mainstream religion.
Lutherans in Germany. Bruno jumped at an invitation to lecture at Oxford in England.
But, just now that I'm just, like, talking, during this period, after the Protestant, revolution and all that kind of stuff, there were a lot of people in the Catholic world and in the Protestant world that just started looking back at ancient writings like Bruno, who look back at all this Hermeticism stuff, or, Marsilio Ficino, who did the same thing. He actually translated the Hermetic corpus. There are a bunch of people who look back and said, okay, well, the Catholic worldview is this Aristotelian kind of worldview that Aquinas and a bunch of other people built on top of. Maybe we can totally redefine how things work, right? So that's what he's trying to do, whether he wants to be a Christian or not, right?
With an audience of his peers.
I have come to present a new vision of the cosmos. Copernicus was right to argue that our world is not the center of the universe. The Earth goes around the sun. It's a planet just like the others. But Copernicus was only the dawn. I bring you the sunrise. The stars are other fiery suns made of the same substance as the Earth.
So notice also that, a couple interesting things about Copernicus. Now, they don't tell you this. Now, Copernicus wrote his writings around 50 years before Bruno goes through his persecution and all that kind of stuff. And the funny thing about that is that Bruno, as I said, the documentary is not going to present, it's going to present him as some meek guy who is just haplessly persecuted. He, wishes the best. But again, he was known to be kind of an arrogant and confrontational guy. And Copernicus's views, again, they were not instantly accepted, but they were validly looked at as, this could be a sensible worldview, right? This could be an option. It could be a mathematically useful. And of course, Bruno, it was really the whole Bruno affair of him he denied the Trinity and all this other stuff that was not really relevant to his view of the universe. It's kind of related, but either way, because of Bruno's heresy tied in with his endorsement of this heliocentrism and stuff like that, it actually kind of tainted Copernicus's views and a lot of the views of the heliocentrists. And so after this period, the Inquisition actually came out and said, look, Bruno, clearly these ideas have made Bruno go nuts, and they might spread to other people. And, I want to say a little after this period, after his execution, and this was before Galileo, the Inquisition said, yeah, this whole thing, heliocentrism is like a dangerous and pseudoscientific idea, and it's totally suspect, right? So if Bruno had not been doing what he did, again, before Bruno, you could believe this kind of stuff, but he kind of tainted with association. Now, I'm not saying that he was bad for what he said or something like that, but again, there are more complexities here. The church didn't come after Copernicus, but after Copernicus, I think, was dead, and Bruno has his things, then they're like, okay, maybe we should censor Copernicus. And when Kepler put out his stuff, they were censored briefly too. the church revoked the censorship. I think it was put on the index after this Bruno affair, and then Kepler wrote after this Bruno's affair. But the church, as maybe a decade went on, the church was like, okay, well, maybe that was just Bruno and a couple other weirdos. So we're not going to put these books on the prohibited list. In fact, again, talking about Galileo, right? So Galileo, of course, is happening a couple decades after all of this, where initially, I'll go ahead and go into it because I guess it's relevant. So Galileo, endorses heliocentrism, and he has his own views on that, and he, does the moons of Jupiter stuff, which, again, at the time was still very, suspect as a scientific theory. And the church, which had just been tainted by, their experience with Bruno, said, yeah, Galileo, this stuff is crap. It's basically heresy. You shouldn't do it. But the Pope actually tried to come to his defense and said, okay, here's the deal. You can write about heliocentrism, but just be kind of objective, right? Include the for and against arguments and stuff like that, and that'll be fine. And Galileo famously put out this dialogue, more or less mocking church authority, or not even church authority, really Aristotelianism in general, where he had this dumb guy named Simplicio, which is simpleton. In the dialogue, he was the one that was always using the Aristotelian arguments, or the church's arguments, so-called. And after that, then the Pope was like, oh, screw you, and basically, well, that's when, the whole trial and all that kind of stuff happened. But, even while Galileo's trial was happening, even this idea that, oh my goodness, it's persecution of scientific views, at that exact same period was when Kepler's books were being, okay, actually, we don't need to have these on the prohibited books list, right? So, I don't know, it's just the whole narratives behind all this stuff is just, I'm sorry for pausing so often, but theoretically you need my input to understand that it's, a lot of the assumptions here are just so egregious. That's what is annoying.
With plants and animals no less noble than our own.
Are you mad or merely ignorant? Everyone knows there is only one world.
What everyone knows is wrong. Our infinite God has created a boundless universe with an infinite number of worlds.
Do they not read Aristotle where you come from? Or even the Bible?
I beg you.
I mean, they're presenting... Again, many people have argued things similar to what Bruno has argued. The reason he was persecuted... Like, this whole scene is just made up. It's not like... I don't know. Like, the reason for his persecution was narrowly theological things. Like, he didn't believe in transubstantiation and the Trinity and, you know, the divinity of Jesus and all this kind of stuff. Like, this idea of him being persecuted is kind of irrelevant. Now, his views were not necessarily popular, and he did get a lot of scientific roasting, because, again, he was like a dilettante. He was like an average guy who was not a scientist. He was a mystic, and he was going around telling geocentrists, oh, this is wrong and this is wrong, like all this stuff that, you know, they had worked out, and he kind of embarrassed himself about, right? That's the real thing here. So this whole portrayal of the scene is just stupid.
Antiquity, tradition, faith, and authority.
Oh, and this statement he would probably not even say. Oh, reject antiquity, that's just dumb. And again, he's part of the Renaissance, and the whole idea of the Renaissance is going back to antiquity, going back to tradition, and getting these older views of science, right? This idea that he's an experimentalist and that, oh, they're based on authority, it's nonsense. He's just going back to even older authorities, even legendary authorities like Hermes Trismegistus. Like, this is so silly, you know?
Let us begin anew by doubting everything we assume has been proven.
Heretic, infidel!
Your God is too small.
This is just so fake. This is so fake. Now, he did get a roasting in Oxford, that is true, from what I hear, but, you know.
He couldn't keep his soaring vision of the cosmos to himself, despite the fact that the penalty for doing so in his world was the most vicious form of cruel and unusual punishment.
Oh, let's find out.
Giordano Bruno lived at a time when there was no such thing as the separation of church and state.
We'll get into that comment, actually.
That freedom of speech was a sacred right of every individual.
I don't know. There are a lot of things I could add here,
The
but
idea
we'll
that didn't
just...
conform to traditional belief could land you in deep trouble.
As opposed to our time.
Bruno returned to Italy. Maybe he was homesick, but still, he must have known that his homeland was one of the most dangerous places in Europe he could possibly go. The Roman Catholic Church maintained a system of courts known as the Inquisition, and its sole purpose was to investigate and torment anyone who dared voice views that differed from theirs.
Yeah, that's just not true. I mean, I guess I've already said enough to tell you that, there were lots of views of lots of different things. This idea that there's some stifled intellectual speech in the Middle Ages and afterwards is silly. Did the church censor Protestants? Yes. Did they censor later philosophical works that they thought led to atheism? Yes. But they also spoke... I mean, they directly engaged with atheistic thought, again, like Lucretius that they use an example of, atomism, things like this. These are things that people talked about all the time. All of this idea that, oh my goodness, like he couldn't say, it's just stupid. It's just false. There's more intellectual freedom at this period than there is in universities now. Anyone who's familiar with it, I think, I don't know, it's just silly. And additionally, I'll go ahead and say my thing on the church, the separation of church and state. Here's another thing where people are deceptive. They have this idea, the evil church and their inquisition. They went out and they tortured people and they killed people and because they believe different things. It's nonsensical. How it worked is a secular authority. Now, a secular authority, they would, if someone committed treason or something egregious, they would have capital punishment for them, right? It was the same thing with heresy. Heresy was looked at as a kind of treason. But the difference is the secular authorities generally did not want to actually try people for heresy. They asked the church to do it. Okay, so the church would come in, the church would do a trial, and they would not. He's already insinuating that like Giordano Bruno was like tortured or something, which is silly. I mean, he said torment. I don't know if he wants to say torture, because then someone could say that's not true. But, I guess torment in the sense of bothered. But what would happen is the church would come in, they would give a trial, they would, see what the person viewed, and, what their writings were, and all this kind of stuff, ask them questions, and they would basically say whether or not that person is a heretic. And, of course, they would always give them, the ability to recant. But if they didn't recant, the church would say, okay, well, this guy's a heretic, he didn't repent, so you do with him whatever you want. And it was not the church who ever executed anyone or did anything like that. They just said whether someone's teachings are in line with them or not. And secular authorities would be the one. In Giordano's case, where he was eventually executed, he was not executed by the church. He was not, burned at stake by the church. In fact, no one was. This idea of inquisitions killing people, it was secular authorities who said, we want to hunt out heretics. And how they prove that someone's a heretic is they use... they have the church come in and run an inquisition, which is a tainted word because, again, people think of, people being, sawn in half or something or being tortured, where it's not accurate. It's not accurate in the Roman Inquisition.
This wanderer, who worshipped an infinite universe, languished in confinement for 8 years.
Oh, did you say he worshipped an infinite universe?
This wanderer,
okay. At least he's being honest. Because it's not him worshipping God and the universe is infinite. It's him worshipping an infinite universe. He's a pantheist, right?
Willing to go to such lengths to torment Bruno.
Oh, you gotta love this. So the church going to such lengths to torment. Notice how they just brainwashed you there. Okay, let's because as I said, if he came out and said the church tortured, they did horrible things to his body, they whipped him, or I don't know what you want to insinuate. If they came out and said that, a historian would say, wait, is that actually true? Do you have any evidence for that? Same thing with Galileo. Galileo was never tortured. The Inquisition said at some point, well, if you don't cooperate, we might do some kind of torture. But the idea that they just torture everyone, or that torturing was maiming or something crazy, is just not true. There were cases of torture in the Middle Ages and afterwards in the post-Middle Ages now, where there were tortures that, were bad, but the church had very specific rules. If you do torture someone, which is very rare, the proper ways for doing it. But notice what they do here.
Views. Why was the church willing to go to
they show you pictures of all these implements
what were they afraid of?
And put the idea in your head that this is the kind of stuff that they did to Bruno, when there's no reason to think that. It's just so stupid. I don't want to say it's lying, but it's saying something that leads you to a false conclusion, which is basically lying,
Verdict. You are found guilty of questioning the Holy Trinity and the divinity of Jesus Christ.
Again, look at the shadows on his eyes. You just know you're supposed to not like him.
Of believing that God's wrath is not eternal, that everyone will be saved, of asserting the existence of other worlds.
So notice that they're at least honest here, okay? In that all the things he's actually found guilty of are actual heresy. It has nothing to do with scientific claims. It has nothing to do with anything else. Except for they tacked on that last thing about, there are multiple worlds. Which, I'm trying to think off the top of my head, who else believed in multiple worlds. I can't think of one. But the idea that, he would have been... If he were, an Orthodox Christian who had... normal Christian beliefs and also had the idea maybe the universe is infinite and maybe there are multiple worlds, none of this would have ever happened. This is the thing that I think people need to realize. This was a heresy proceeding about heresy, and the idea that it's scientific persecution is just very silly.
All of the books you have written will be gathered up and burned in St. Peter's Square. Reverend Father, these 8 years of confinement have given me much time to reflect. So, you will recant? My love and reverence. Yeah, and notice, of course, the Inquisition always gave people the ability to recant if they said something heretical, right? So it's not like Bruno, basically at the end of his life, he has the ability to still cuck out. He can cuck out and say, yeah, I don't believe in this crap, whatever, I'll just not talk about it, and we'll go on, right? And yeah, maybe you don't want to cuck out, but he could say that. At this point, he's basically choosing to go with whatever punishment the secular authorities give him. The Creator inspires in me the vision of an infinite creation. You shall be turned over to the governor of...
I think also, even using the word creator and creation, just as a philosophical note, I don't know if people of like that kind of hermetic view should really use the word creation and creator. Those are kind of specific to classical theism, just in the way that they use. That's a minor inaccuracy, right? Like, so creation and creator have to be like different categories. This is something that's spelled out in Aquinas and a lot of other medieval writers. Like, they're two different things. So, like, you know, God can have opera ad extra and opera ad intra, like operations internal to him and out external. And so the difference between theism, classical theism, and pantheism would be, you know, in theism, it's an opus ad extra, whereas in Bruno's view, it's basically an, you know, opus ad, you know, intra, right? It's God creating something in himself, but it's not really creation. It's kind of whatever. Minor stupid note.
Punishment for those who will not repent. It may be that you are more afraid to deliver this judgment than I am to hear it.
That's actually a real quote. I don't exactly get it. I mean, maybe he was insinuating that he had popular supporters, but that's a real quote that Bruno made when he was found guilty of heresy. Okay, so I think it's winding up. I think that's about all they say about it. But I just want to say, let me turn that off. Let me turn the that off. Oh yeah, he's got to be burned at the stake. But anyway, so this is like a really good example of, again, if you just watch this and you don't know any better, you're like, oh my goodness, like the evil church. I mean, not just, like, they're talking about the church, but they're talking not just about religion, but more generally. Oh my goodness, like these people persecuted this poor guy for his scientific views, you know, he didn't do nothing, like he's a good boy, all this kind of stuff like that. And this isn't me saying that, like, you know, Bruno should have been persecuted for his views or something like that on a scientific basis, but like the thing is, like, a lot of people like Neil deGrasse Tyson, they have this kind of like I don't know, persecution complex, kind of martyr complex. They have to like put themselves as the little guy against the big church authority or something like that, which is just silly, and it's inaccurate. Like, I've talked about Galileo, whose situation was basically the same thing, where Galileo went out of his way to kind of antagonize people, and he'd you know, make all these kind of arguments that people didn't really buy, and it was really the side of science at the period. It was the side of institutionalized science that was skeptical of heliocentrism and all that kind of stuff. Same thing with Bruno's views. So this like simplistic Whig history view of science, I think it's very silly. Anyway, so I actually pulled up over here, or no, I had in this document. If you want to read just a little bit more, where is Bruno? There's a little blog post you can read that actually goes into more detail than, you know, I went to in this little commentary. Again, the internet's loading like so slow. It's on historyforatheists.com. Anyway, they did an article on Giordano Bruno and like looking specifically at his views and, you know, how he's misinterpreted and stuff like that in the wider context. So that will give you more of a view than me just kind of commenting off the cuff. Actually, I think this blog, I've seen this blog multiple times. It's like, I mean, it's kind of tongue-in-cheek history for atheists. It's more like addressing, I mean, the thing with atheists is that, like, they can really fall for memes a lot. Like, it's one thing to be an atheist, but there are a lot of atheists who will do this, like, zeitgeist, like, oh, like, Jesus is, Jesus mythicism, or, like, this weird interpretation of history that's it's just like internet rumors, and it's not true. Either way, this blog talks about a lot of other stuff that's like that. So I will put links to this. I'll put links to this in the video description. I don't know if I'm going to put this on YouTube. I don't know if they're going to be... I don't know if this is like fair use of the documentary, but I might just put this up on PeerTube. Maybe I'll put it up on YouTube, and if it gives me a strike, I'll take a strike. Whatever, who cares? So anyway, that's it. Hopefully you learned something, and I will. I'm not gonna like watch this entire documentary series, but I will just say there's a lot of other stuff in it. If you know, it's like the Murray Gell-Mann effect. Like, if you watch this thing, if you just see its information and you don't know any better, you'll probably just passively accept it. But if you specifically know more about that topic or the history or something, you will look at a lot of this documentary and be like, that's not really accurate. And that's kind of how I feel. So, anyway, that's it. I'll see you guys next time.